I am going to hand over to Bethany Jordan.
You see the screen okay, huh?
Hi everyone, thank you for attending our webinar. As Nikki said, this is an introduction to anatomy and physiology. So let's get started. I am Bethany Jordan. Here are my credentials. I'm not very good at promoting them, so we'll keep moving. So we do have prerequisite homework that you guys have completed, and I thank you for that. There's also going to be throughout this presentation some words that are in red text on some of the slides. Make sure you make note of which words those are because you will need them later. It's just to verify that you attended the whole presentation. So the goal for today's webinar is for me to provide you guys with a basic understanding of how our internal body systems function. We're going to be mainly focusing on dogs and cats and what impacts those systems have on our observations of their daily behavior or any potentially abnormal behavior. All right. So in part one, we're going to be covering basic location terminology, the lymphatic system, the cardiovascular or circulatory system, the endocrine system, the digestive system, the integumentary system, and sense organs. So that's what we're going to be going into detail with. Now to start off with basic terminology, and I know you guys have all had the notebook given to you. When you first look at this diagram, it's pretty intimidating. There's lots of words, lots of colors, but basically one big concern that everybody in the pet world has, all pet professionals, is how can we relate to our veterinarian better? How can we better facilitate relationships? And truly, one of the best ways to do that is to know some of the terminology. Medicine is almost like a whole other language, and I didn't realize it until I got out of medicine for a while and started trying to have normal conversations. It really is a whole other language. So the more that we know their language and the more that we know it properly, then the better you guys are going to be able to have respectful relationships with them and to build camaraderie. So we're not going to worry about all of these terms in this picture, but I'm going to point out the most important ones and exactly what they pertain to. So right off the bat, we have cranial and caudal at the front end and the back end of this cat. And that's exactly what this is saying. If something is towards the head, then it's cranial. If it's toward the tail, it's caudal. All right, then the other two big ones are the dorsal and ventral. Dorsal towards the back, just like a dolphin and a dorsal fin. So anything dorsal is towards the back, and ventral would be towards the abdomen. All right. Now there is one other section on here, and this is only if you're dealing with something, say a laceration on a limb, and you need to be able to describe where it's located. So if you look at the animal's limb, if it's toward the foot and it's away from the body, it's distal. If it's closer to the body, then it's proximal. All right, so those are the big ones to worry about. Don't worry about all the different planes, the transversal, sagittal, frontal, all of those are the planes in which we're dividing this animal in order to come up with that terminology. So you guys don't have to worry about any of that, but the most important things are the cranial and caudal, dorsal, ventral, and the proximal and distal, okay? Now, I added one more on here, and honestly, I don't know this dog's history. I just found this picture because it was really hard for me to get a picture that showed the median line very well. So essentially this dog, where its incision is, or whatever happened to this dog, this is the median plane of this animal's body. So this is another way that we divide in order to get proper terminology for location. So if you were to divide this animal down right where its incision is, you have the dog split in half, so you have the median or the middle of the dog. If something is located close to that median plane, close to it, then that's medial. But if it's located further out on the dog's body or towards its side, that's lateral. In the first aid presentation, I talked about how the animal will be in lateral recumbency, and lateral recumbency just means it's going to be lying on its side. So there's that lateral terminology coming into play a little bit more. All right. So throughout this whole presentation, part one and part two, we're going to be doing just a basic overview of all the animal body systems. That includes the lymphatic system, the circulatory system, the the endocrine system, the digestive system, the integumentary system, which is a really fancy word for basically skin, sensory organs, the skeletal system, our muscular system, the nervous system, the respiratory system, the urinary system, and the reproductive system. Again, this is all basic overview kind of stuff. So here's just a picture of a basic outline of where the organs are located. This is your basic internal anatomy of a dog, and cats are also very similar. The animals that start to get a little bit out there are more of your large animals. You're going to see quite a big difference in their anatomy, but small animals, this is essentially what you're looking at as far as organ placement. Okay. We start off with the lymphatic system, and the lymphatic system has constantly been referred to as the garbage disposal system. I like to think of it more as an infection control system. The lymphatic system actually does quite a bit for our bodies and for animals' bodies. It works, we have the spleen. The spleen is the biggest organ, the biggest part of this system, and it actually ingests toxins or bacteria, cell debris, so it can be processed and excreted by the body appropriately. So on top of that, we also have stimulation between the bone marrow and the lymph nodes. We also get an immune response, and we have stimulation of white blood cells, which is what our body uses to fight off any form of infection, be it virus, bacterial, whatever. So it's actually more of an infection control system. And if you think of the body more of like a machine, and we constantly have fluids fluctuating in and out, this system is also very important for that, because you always have some seepage from your blood vessels of extra fluid. If there's an area of high pressure, automatically in the body that fluid is going to go from the area of high pressure to the area of low pressure. Well, the lymphatic system collects that excess fluid and sends it back into circulation. So really, really valuable system in our bodies. Now, the ones that you can palpate on animals or actually feel as far as lymph nodes go are the lymph nodes that are located just under the jaw, or the submandibular lymph nodes. The cervical lymph nodes you cannot feel, but you can feel the next ones down from that. That's called the prescapular lymph nodes. And then you can feel the popliteal, or the ones on the back legs. So say a dog has an infection in the mouth. You can expect to have an enlarged submandibular lymph node and an enlarged prescapular lymph node. If a dog has lymph nodes, every single one of them that you can feel, then you're looking at a potential problem, potentially even lymphoma. So it's a really good thing to check out and practice palpating them on your dogs, because you'll really be able to feel them. When you do feel the ones that are underneath the jaw, just be aware that salivary glands are located there as well, and they're large. So those salivary glands can kind of give you a misrepresentation sometimes of the actual size of the lymph nodes. But the more you practice it, the better you'll be able to feel it. Okay? So the next system we have is our cardiovascular and our circulatory system. This is actually one of my favorite systems, because it's just amazing how the body works. Through electrolytes, we actually create a cardiac impulse in the heart, which then pumps the blood. We can think of this on a basic term as a continuous network of tubes that just runs throughout the whole body. And every single inch of the body is absolutely vital that these tubes reach, so that we get circulation and we get exchange of gases, hormones, metabolites. So if you think of it, just the blood is the transport in the body, and the heart is the main pump that actually physically pumps the fluids, including the nutrients and everything throughout the body. The heart is composed of 4 chambers. You have the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. The right side of the heart functions to get oxygen-poor and nutrient-poor blood from the body to send it into the lungs, where then it goes to the left side of the heart and is then pumped out into circulation in the chest or throughout the body. And we all know that sound, that typical sound of a heartbeat, the lub-dub. Well, what you're hearing when you hear lub-dub, the lub is the atrium contracting, and the dub is the ventricle contracting. So it's pretty amazing how we can all do all of it all at the same time and be perfectly synchronized to constantly supply our body with the nutrients and gases that it needs. your smaller blood vessels throughout the body. Again, you've got arteries, veins, arterioles, venules, and as this continues, you're just getting smaller. The capillaries are your really tiny blood vessels that helps to connect the other major blood vessels in the body. And then, of course, you got the most important component, which is made up of plasma, which is the fluid component of blood. And then within that, you also have your particulates, or your particles in the blood, and that is including red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Okay? The endocrine system. The endocrine system is another really, really important part of our body. It's extremely complex. This is a system of ductless glands that secrete hormones. So they're just secreting these hormones directly into the bloodstream. So since these hormones are just being in the bloodstream, technically they're in systemic circulation all the time. But these chemicals are highly specialized so that they only act on very specific organs. And it can be so specific that one gland can produce and secrete this hormone or chemical, and it will go to another gland strictly to activate it to produce another hormone to act on the body. So they're very, very specific chemicals. It takes a very tiny amount of these chemicals to actually get an effect on the body. I've listed here some of the major glands that are part of this system, and you've got quite a few of them that do very, very, very specialized things. It can be anything from full body metabolism, such as the thyroid gland, and that's something that's becoming more and more recognized, even in our, in our small animals at this time. Cats are known to have hyperthyroidism, where it's overproducing, and dogs are known to have hypothyroid, where it's not producing enough. So it completely affects full body metabolism at that point. Another really good example of the body functioning as a system is with this particular system. It functions as a machine. So in cases of stress, the adrenal glands are stimulated to produce cortisol to assist the body in dealing with the stress. And it's a check and balance kind of system. So it constantly supplies feedback to these organs or these glands that are producing these chemicals or hormones. And then the body then decides if it needs more or if it's okay. So in times of stress, the adrenal glands are producing cortisol. And then they get feedback back to the adrenal glands saying, nope, stressor's gone. Then they stop secreting as much cortisol. Okay? The same thing goes for all the other organs. It's completely a feedback system. They only produce until the body tells them, okay, we've got enough, and then they cut back. And there's always a counterbalance, so it keeps itself in check. The body's main goal is to remain in balance, and this is one of the main systems that facilitates that. Right? Our digestive system. Essentially, the main function or goal of our digestive system is to take nutrients from the environment, break them down into a way that our body can handle them, process them, and utilize them to either provide energy for the body or to facilitate other body functions. So it starts off with a mechanical processing. Okay? You can think of the GI system or the digestive system as one continuous tube that's got two openings, one for the mouth for input of these foodstuffs and potential nutrients, and then you have the output or the excretion of non-useful substances, non-nutritional substances. All right? The mouth is an extremely important part of this system. You've got mechanical processing. The teeth are actually chewing up the foodstuff, so it increases the surface area and therefore helps with chemical digestion in the stomach later on. You have saliva. Animal saliva is a little bit different than human saliva. Human saliva, we have an enzyme called amylase, right, in our saliva. So when we eat starch, it actually starts the digestion process right in our mouth. Dogs don't have that. But what they do have is lots of lubrication. That's why their saliva is a lot thicker than ours. They don't typically chew their food as much as we do, so it provides lubrication. It also provides some acid-base balance potential so that when it does reach the stomach, it can help control the acid-base balance. And it has anti-foaming properties for in the stomach to facilitate the digestion process. So Unlike us, the digestion doesn't physically start in the mouth except for with us chewing, but it does facilitate digestion later on. Then from there, you have the esophagus, which then the peristalsis, or the actual muscle movements in the esophagus, transfer that foodstuffs that we've swallowed all the way down into the stomach, where then the chemical digestion takes place. The pH balance in the stomach is really acidic. There's hydrochloric acid and enzymes and all kinds of specialized chemicals to help break down specific types of food that the animal eats. So once that process is finished, then you're left with this kind of sludgy, liquidy substance called chyle, which is then transported into the small intestine. The small intestine is where most of the nutrition actually, the absorption of the nutrients actually takes place. And you have facilitation of the gallbladder, the liver, and the pancreas, which produce very specific enzymes to facilitate digestion. And the liver produces bile, which is then stored in the gallbladder, and the bile is then put into the GI tract as well, along with this chyle, to help break down any fats. So that's the whole function of bile. So then from there it travels into the large intestines, which mainly just functions to remove any excess liquid out of the chyle, so that way we can reabsorb that liquid into our bodies and stay hydrated. And then any excess is excreted out the cecum, colon, rectum, and then out the anus. Okay. Now we're going to get into the integumentary system, and like I mentioned earlier, it's pretty much just a really fancy word for skin, and everything that is also included with the skin, which includes nails, hair. There's also specialized integument, which we're going to talk about. So basically, there's 2 layers to skin. You've got your upper layer, which is the epidermis, and this is your surface layer. This layer is not vascular. And then you have your lower layer, which contains your blood vessels and your nerves and things like that. The lower layer is really important because that's what provides us with our sensory information. That's where we get touch from, pressure. We sense heat. You know, a kid puts his hand on a hot stove and snatches it away really quickly. That's how the sensory nerves come from that lower level. It also synthesizes vitamin D, and it functions to store some of our nutrients for us. And some of those nutrients are kind of fat and oils that are also stored in the sebaceous glands, which then come out around the hair follicle itself. All right. Overall, the hair in the coat is a major indication of health, overall health and well-being of this animal. So if you see an animal with a really dry coat, or maybe it's got, you know, spotchy hair loss, brittle coat, maybe flaky, you've got to wonder, number one, about the animal's nutrition, and then maybe number two, that there's some kind of secondary major systemic problem going on or some disease process. If there's an animal that has a really nice coat and all of a sudden you see it really starting to change, then that's a really big indication that there's something going on with this animal. They should have really nice shiny coats. Essentially, the coat is made up from the keratin, which is a protein, and also a form of dead skin cells. It's not the same dead skin cells that slough off of your skin on a daily basis, but it's a similar type of dead skin cell that is specialized to grow up into the hair. The hair grows from follicles located in the dermis, and we can go back to that diagram. So the hair grows actually from the follicle, and that part of the hair that's underneath the skin is actually called the root, and the part of the hair that's on top of the skin is called the shaft. Each hair follicle does have 2 sebaceous glands, as we've already talked about, and sebum is what that oily substance that's secreted from the sebaceous glands is called. For the most part, animals have 3 types of hair. All right, they have primary hairs, which are guard hairs, and there's only 1 per follicle. These hairs need to be really hardy because they serve a really serious purpose of protection and protecting the undercoat. Your secondary hairs, which is kind of your undercoat, which is your fluffier coat that provides more of the warmth, there can be up to 15 hairs per follicle. because the function of those hairs is to provide warmth, so you want a lot of them in there. And then you have your specialized cells, which turn into your tactile sinus hairs, and those are your whiskers. They are also surrounded by the venous cavity sensory nerves, which makes them highly sensitive to any type of air movement or touch or things like that. Now, each breed has different types of coats. And this is something that I wasn't familiar with entirely of all the terminology, even though I was a vet tech for years, until I got into actually pet care. Because there are a lot of people that really understand their breed, they love their breed, and it just really helps us out to have the right terminology and be able to answer their questions. Here's a few examples of the type of coats that dogs have. This is also important to understand the special needs of each coat, because such as the little Shih Tzu in the top right-hand corner, you need to know how to properly brush them so that you don't inadvertently damage their hair. Or in the Poolie in the bottom left, that's not a dog that you're going to want to let play in the pond and then remain wet for a long time, because you'll just be asking for a skin infection to happen. We're going to talk about more skin issues and things to watch out for in the next module of health and handling. But these are a few things that kind of just start understanding the terminology and get comfortable with. There's also lots of coat colors, and again, people that really love their breeds, they know all the coat colors, so it'll just help you to even understand the terminology even more. All right. Blue, sable, white, lots of specialized colors in different breeds. There's also coat patterns. You've got your two-color coats, like your Border Collies. You've got tri-color coats. And your brindle coats, like in your boxers and bulldogs, is typically a tiger stripe pattern. All right. And I have made the mistake of calling a Harlequin a Merle before, and that you don't get away with that very often. So definitely understand the difference between a Harlequin, a Merle, or part colors. Okay, the nail anatomy. We're going to talk about more about nail trims and the health and handling. The nail anatomy, it's important to have a basic understanding so that when you're looking at a dog's nail and you need to do nail trims, that you know exactly what you're looking at. Or in case of a broken nail, as was in the first aid presentation, you need to be able to know, how serious something may be. Essentially, the nail is composed of the same kind of epithelial cells in hair, kind of the dead skin cells, but they're very specialized dead skin cells. And then inside of that, you have an area of pulp, kind of more of a fleshy tissue that contains the blood vessel and the nerve. And then if you go even further back, there actually is bone in the first part of the nail. So just make sure when you're cutting that you know exactly where you're cutting their nails. And again, we're going to talk about that in the next webinar. Okay, it was really important to me that I went ahead and put something in here about understanding the different pads of the feet. It's really common for dogs to get lacerations on the pads of their feet, or they can get infections in between the toes. And if you're trying to describe exactly where it is, it really helps to have the proper terminology so that you can document it in your records. So essentially, it's the weight-bearing part of the limb. It has several functions, just how it's designed. Protect and cushion, that's why it's got kind of a lot of fatty tissue and connective tissue, kind of tougher tissue that makes up the bottom of the pad. It also supplies friction, so that animal can grip the ground to run. So your basic parts are A, the nail or the claw, and you've got your digital pads, just like with humans. Our fingers are also referred to as digits, same as dogs. And then with C, this gets a little bit confusing. So it's either palmar or plantar rear pads. And the only difference between that is if it's a front or a rear leg. It's more of that location terminology. So think of palmar like the palm of your hand, and plant like you plant your feet. And you'll be able to keep it separate. It's just some of that specific terminology. So that's the pad, palmar on the front, plantar on the back. Then, of course, you have your dew claw, which actually functions between the dew claw and the carpal pad. If the dog's running hard and cutting, then they can actually flatten out their paw and that gives them a lot more surface area to grip with, and also they actually use their dew claw to grip and turn and pivot. So it is highly functional. Okay, major body systems. This is really important for behavior and to understand exactly how dogs interpret their environment. So, sense organs. Essentially, the sense organs provide the brain with information about the environment, what's going on around this animal. So it includes such organs as the eyes, the ears, the nose, and the tongue. The eye allows for a perception of light, for color, and again, we know that's different in each species. We're going to talk about that. Movement and distance and perception. Okay, so the sclera is the white part of the eye. Then, of course, you have your eyelids. And dogs and cats do have what's called a third eyelid, and that's located on the inside of the eye. So where it says conjunctiva, there's actually a little eye flap right on the inside here, on the inside of the eye, that we refer to as the third eyelid. A lot of the time when an animal's not feeling well, if they've been sedated, or if they have pain in the eye, you will see that third eyelid come up. So the actual eye itself, we have the iris is the colored part of the eye, and the pupil is, of course, what dilates and constricts to allow light in and control the amount of light. So we talked about the conjunctiva briefly in the first aid presentation. That's the pink part of the inside of the eye. That can tell you also about mucous membrane color if you can actually visualize the conjunctiva. We'll get into some more details here. Okay, so there's several reasons why animals can see better than we can at night, particularly dogs and cats. All right, so light passes through the pupil. It's refracted by that lens. The lens is almost like a mirror that sits like a reflective panel behind the eye, or behind the pupil. And then it disperses that light, hitting the photoreceptors. The photoreceptors are your rods and your cones. The rods are responsible for interpreting dim light and being able to see better in dim light. And the cones supply bright light and color. Now, dogs and cats have a lot more rods than we do, so they are better adept at interpreting dim light. They also have a tapetum. You know, if you take your dog's picture, your cat's picture, their eyes are always look like demon eyes in the camera. They have a really bright tapetum, which is basically a really, really sensitive mirror in the back of their eyes. So it allows them to even process even more light that it can then send to the rods so that it can detect every bit of light that's available in the environment. All right. All of that information is then sent to the optic nerve, which passes that signal to the brain. Okay, so this kind of gets into what I was talking about a little bit more. So if we break it down to what the differences are between dogs, cats, and humans, this is the best information that I can find. And again, we don't know a lot of it. Mostly it's dependent on where the animal's eyes are located on its head. So you can see where a pug's field of vision is going to be completely different than a German Shepherd's. So this is completely average numbers, and depending on where you look, you find a wide array of different numbers and field of vision. But this is the best I could find to be accurate. So if we go ahead and say the minimum light required for us to see as humans, a dog requires 4 times less than that, and a cat potentially is even more, sensitive, so they can require 5 to 6 times less than what we need to see as a human. That's pretty significant. Our field of vision, so if you're just standing looking straight, what you can see around you is 210 degrees, where dogs and cats, because of the positioning of their eyes, they have a really high advantage in that area because they can do 250 to 290 for dogs, and again 285 for cats. So it just has to do with more the placement of the eyes on the head and the shape of the skull. Binocular overlap is what allows us to have 3D vision. So that binocular overlap is where we can use both eyes to see in the middle, and we can see 3D vision. We get depth perception very accurately. We are much better at animals than that, and it comes to, again, our eyes are placed right in the front of our head. So for humans, it's 120 degrees. For dogs, it's 80 to 110, and for cats, it's 130. Our color spectrum, of course, humans, we see a broad color spectrum, and this is still an area of controversy between dogs and cats. We know that dogs can differentiate several shades of gray, black, white, and also blue and orange. Cats, they think that cats now, they're starting to lean more towards cats having much more similar spectrum vision, similar to the dog, that they think that they can see blue and orange, but they definitely have a huge advantage over dogs because they have a really wide scale of grays, whites, and blacks. That's what makes them such excellent predators, that they can pick out very, very minute differences in shades of gray. And then as we talked about the rods and the cones, rods are dim light, cones are bright light in color. The human is 20-to-1. In cats, it's 25-to-1, and in dogs, they're not really sure, but it's somewhere around between 20 and 24-to-1 for dogs, so they can differentiate that dark light a little bit better. And then here's a diagram that shows just that. So the center triangle, as you're looking at this, the center bright turquoise triangle is the binocular vision, and then coming out to each side is our field of vision. So you can see the difference of the placements of the eyes on the chest, or on the head, and the skull, and how that affects their vision. Okay? The ear. So dogs have 3 parts to an ear, same as humans. So you have your external or outer ear, you have your middle ear, and then you have your internal ear. Okay? The external ear includes the pinna and everything all the way down to the eardrum or the tympanic membrane. The middle ear is your tympanic bulla or the middle ear cavity, and then your inner ear is fluid-filled, and it's this kind of area right in here in the cochlea, which contains the nerves that send the information to the brain. So what happens is the animals have this excellent way to maneuver their pinna so that they can isolate sounds very accurately. Once they isolate that sound, then the vibrations travel down through the external ear canal to the eardrum, which functions like a drum. It actually concusses due to the vibrations. It then sends airflow throughout the tympanic bulla or the middle ear cavity, which go through 3 tiny ossicles, or the bones right here that vibrate, and then send that information into the cochlea, where it can then be sent to the brain. The most important thing to note with this is how different the ear canal in the dog is versus the ear canal in the human. Our ear canal essentially goes straight in. For a dog, it actually runs down the side of their face, and then it enters into the eardrum itself. And that's important because we're going to talk about this more in the health and handling, but you never want to put anything down into a dog's ear canal, because it's such a long, deep cavity that you can cause a lot of problems. Okay, basically the most important thing to know is what we just talked about. There's 3 sections to the ear. You have the outer ear, which consists of the pinna, the ear flap itself, and everything all the way down to the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. That's all considered the outer or the external ear. And this is actually the most common ear infections. When you see a dog's ear and it has like a lot of debris inside, this is typically what your infection is. It's actually an external infection. We call it otitis externa. All right, the middle ear is just pretty much that tympanic bulla, everything after the tympanic membrane or the eardrum and before the cochlea. So it's all that tympanic bulla that really concuss that sound so that it can travel and get as much information as possible into the cochlea and then therefore the brain. And then the inner ear. And the inner ear, along with the nerve receptors, also has organs of balance. And this is why people that get inner ear infections, which are pretty rare, but inner ear infections, you really lose balance. You don't know which way is up. We call that vestibular. All right. Canine hearing is measured in vibrations or cycles per second. dogs and cats are more effective in hearing in the high range than we are, and that has a lot to do, again, because of their pinna. They have the ability to move their ears around and search out their environment and actually detect which direction a sound is coming from, and it allows that much more area for that sound to be amplified through their eardrums and through their ear canal in order to be interpreted properly. The one thing that the pinna does not benefit them is they don't know how far the sound is away. They can tell the direction, excellent, but because it's so sensitive, they can't necessarily know if it's close or not. So that's why a lot of the dogs respond to loud noises really drastically, because they don't know how close it is, but they know it's loud. Okay? There are lots of breed differences in ears. And this will also help you not only in talking to people and answering questions, but also dogs that typically get ear infections are the dogs with the big floppy ears, because there's not a whole lot of airflow that gets into that ear canal. So those tend to be the dogs that if they're going to have problems, those are the problems that they're going to have. All right. Of course, the corgi's prick ear. And your hound ears. Those are your very typical for ear infections, hound ears. Okay. Now, the olfactory bulb is actually the receptor in the brain that interprets information, but dogs also have lots of receptors in the mucous membrane of their mucous membranes of their nasal passages. And the dog's nose is so much longer than ours, it automatically allows them to have a lot more receptors to get more information about what's going on. So just for example, a human, we have 5 million receptors in our mucous membranes. The dachshund has 125, the fox terrier has 147, and the German shepherd has 220 million. And so you can see the difference. The German shepherd's nose is a lot longer and a lot bigger than a dachshund. Therefore, they're going to have more receptors in their nasal passages to gather that important information. And then it sends that information to the olfactory bulb in the brain. And recently, they're really starting to study the brain and exactly what happens and how we interpret information and how we learn. And they found that in dogs, that olfactory region, that olfactory bulb is 5 times larger than the human brain, and it's always active. It is absolutely always going and getting information. All right, taste. So we have, everybody's heard of taste buds. Now we have papillae located on our tongue, and the papillae are the kind of the tiny little, almost like protrusions, like you can almost think of them as like little hair-like protrusions, and they have lots of functions. They function for grooming, they function all kinds of different practical purposes for the animal, but there's some very specialized papillae on the tongue that detect taste, and they're located also in the pharynx as well, so all the way at the back of the tongue. So 4 detection types. You've got salt, sweet, bitter, and sour. These all have developed over adaptation over thousands of years to help these animals know what's safe to eat, what's not safe to eat. If it's bitter or sour, it's potentially poisonous, so that's why they have those. Now again, as we talked about with saliva with dogs, it's not necessary for them to chew their food to start the digestion process. They do not have that amylase enzyme in their mouth that starts breaking down starch. They do have 10 times more amylase located throughout their GI tract to be really efficient at breaking down starches, but there is not any in their saliva itself. And as we talked about, it does aid in digestion in other ways, and it is a major lubricant. And it also dissolves those substances, those food particles, so that the taste buds can actually pick them up. Is there any questions?
I'm going to take everybody off mute, so if anybody has any questions, they can ask questions. Leslie, Tom, Melinda, any questions?
No, good on this end.
Okay.
Then we'll go to the homework. All right. So, before we continue with part 2, we'll have you guys go ahead and submit this homework, and it's not hard, but essentially I'm going to talk you through exactly what I'm looking for now. It's just 3 different diagrams that I want you guys to go through labeling. All right, the basic location terminology, because again, I think that's so important to help develop healthy professional relationships with our veterinarians. And I gave you kind of a hint with the diagram on the left. I outlined the midline for you, so that's kind of gives you a hint as what I'm looking for. And then just the most important terminology, location terminology that I outlined on that slide is what I'm looking for in the diagram on the right. All right, this is the digestive system. Again, just the basic parts of the digestive system broken down into its special compartments. And then each part of the ear. Okay? Is there any questions on that?
I don't think so. Great. Okay, so what I will do, I will send you a PDF version of part 1 of this module 201, and we are planning to schedule part 2 at the same time next Monday. So if that is not convenient for somebody, let me know, but I got the impression from all of you that Monday afternoons are a good time and that you are available. When you're doing the homework prior to next week's session, if you have any questions, feel free to email Bethany or myself. And then after the session next Monday, you will then receive the link to take the online self-assessment test for this module before we can get you the pre-work for the next webinar. All right, so I hope that's really clear. If it's not, then please feel free to either contact us by email or by telephone, and we'll go from there. So anything that I need to clarify on what I've just said there? No? Okay, Melinda, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Leslie, go on.
Oh, okay. So we're to complete the homework assignment, and then when that's completed, then we're clear to continue for the next week.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Gotcha.
Okay. All right. So thanks for attending, everybody. I'll also get you a copy of the recording of this so that you can reference back to the recording, and you'll have a hard copy of some of the notes from the PDF too. So with that, I'm going to thank Bethany, and I'm going to end the webinar. So thank you, everybody. If you need us, don't hesitate to give us a call or send us an email.
Thank you.
Have a great week.
You too.